we're gonna be learning about clothing folds, how clothing folds work, how you think about them, all that fun jazz. They're tough, I know. The number one thing that a lot of people say is like, I need to draw clothing folds. But the thing is though, is that folds are different depending on what you're drawing. Very, very different. Folds are not just as easy as yes, it's fabric. There's different things that you gotta think about when you are thinking about your fabrics. So you gotta think about your tension, right? Whether it's tight or loose, what's the garment? Is it like spandex? Is it a knit sweater? So on and so forth, right? How thick, tight, or loose is it? Is it thin or thick? Is it jersey? Is it knit? Is it polyester? Is it a chiffon, right? All those fun different fabrics that I'm naming off that you probably don't know, or you might not know, right? So depending on how thin or thick it is, that'll affect it, and how stiff it is. A suit will bend differently than pajamas. So you're gonna have to think of all those things when you're drawing your clothing folds, because based on the overall fabric type that is present, that'll change how the fabric folds. So you need to think about that texture. Now this is a very, very simple breakdown of how very basic fabric folds would work. So obviously there's a lot of nuance to fabric folds. I'm going to be going over the very, very harsh basics, things that you want to kind of keep in mind when you're drawing your folds. A lot of the time when I have students who are attempting folds for the first time, right, they either add too little or too much. There's a balance that you need, right, in order to draw folds. There's certain areas where folds will be prevalent and certain things that will affect your fabrics that will make them prevalent, with whether it's the positioning of the body, or no, 99% of the time it's positioning of the body, or if it's outside effects, maybe it's very windy, right? You got to think of all that fun jazz. So where do folds go? The first type of folds is something that I like to call bunching areas. So bunching areas are where limbs bend. That is, limbs bend or the body bends. So bunching areas will include kind of the midsection of the torso, where the elbows are, where the knees are. Those are our main bunching areas. If I had to draw an example, let me just give you an arm real quick. Don't mind the glove hand. Let's say that I had like a kind of a sweater, kind of a thicker cotton sweater, which uses loops more so for its fabric folds. So our folds would be kind of like right here. That's where our bunching area is because it's bending. So that's kind of where our bunching area would be. That's same with like the knee. If the knee is bending, there will be some bunching there as well. If the torso is bending over, there'll be some bunching there too. Next portion is the gathering area, which is where excess fabric gathers. So if you're wearing something oversized, if you have something kind of big, kind of loose, kind of hangs around, right? Your gathering area is where that fabric will bunch up. It's a gathering area. It's where your fabric gathers. So that's usually at the cuffs of the sleeves, hems of the pants, bottom of the shirt, right? Those kind of areas are where fabric will gather and bunch up at the bottom. So if we had like a pant leg, right? So if you have the bottom of the pants, say if it's like sweatpants, your gathering area will be kind of down here because that's where all of your fabric gathers. So it kind of hangs limply, right? So we always want to include that for areas with excess fabric. The final fold that we're going to be talking about real quick, tension areas. And that's where fabric can be pulled. These are the toughest ones. Let me show you where tension areas are. Tension areas are tricky. The thing with tension areas is that tension is caused by any external force that is pulling or gathering or taking your fabric and moving it, right? Your tension area can go absolutely anywhere on the body. Say if you have your arm up, right? If you twist your arm, the motion of your arm twisting will affect the fabric that's attached to it. That's a tension area. Say if somebody's grabbing the front of your shirt and pulling it, that's a tension area. If you're jumping and the force of gravity is pulling your shirt down, or if you're falling and the force of gravity is pulling your shirt up, that's a tension area. Your tension areas are affected by literally everything around you. So it can be difficult to figure out where they go. So that's why tension areas are just completely colored in, because they literally go anywhere. If I was to draw a few, right, if I could give you the example, so let's say somebody's grabbing the shirt here. So there's going to be tension there as it gets pulled in these directions. Or if, say if somebody's arms are raised, right, because then the forces are pulling the fabric upwards, so we need that kind of pulled tension in order to show that the fabric is lifting. Tension areas where fabric can be pulled. So if we have this general knowledge in mind, right, where folds go, it's bunching areas, gathering areas, tension areas, that's where the folds go in general. And so let's talk a bit about fold shapes. I'm going to start with TLDRs because we're going to be going a bit more into that, which is less is more and use reference. People hate me when I say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Jessie, I thought you were going to teach me how to draw. Yeah, and guess what? Everybody uses reference when they learn. All right, so your fold shapes, TLDR, less is more. If you're working in a more cartoony style, you do not need to add in every single fold. Even if you're working in a slightly more semi-realistic style, you see this a lot with more semi-realistic anime art styles. They don't rely on line art for their folds. They rely on color. So if you're drawing in a lot of folds and you want it to look more semi-realistic, do not use line art. Use color or value to show your folds. Do not use line art because it ends up looking really, really busy, right? If I were to kind of just quickly draw in something, right? If we kind of have an arm right here. That's too many folds, right? I see this a lot. They just kind of add more and they're like, yes, yes, more and more. That means it looks better. That's not the truth. That's not true. Usually you want to have less, a little bit less. Right, so if you have something a little bit more cartoony, stick to like very few amounts of folds, right? You don't need to worry about there being a crazy amount. So less is more. If there's too much detail, then it'll look like there's none at all. That's what an old professor of mine has said. I will take that advice to the grave because it's so true. And if you're ever unsure, use a reference, right? They're there. Google Images is free. Use a reference, look it up. It's there for you. So thick and heavy fabrics. They usually use loops. Thick and heavy fabrics will use loops. When I say thick and heavy, I usually mean knit. Knit, heavy cotton or fleece, Sherpa. Those are all considered thick and heavy fabrics. Often you'll see them use loops. You'll see like stuff if it's bending, it'll use a loop. So if you have I like to wear turtlenecks. So loops tend to be with your bunching areas. So with your knit, you won't have very small folds. You'll have very large ones because the fabric is so much thicker that it doesn't have the capacity to fold in a much smaller space. So triangles are great for a lot of things, but in terms of thicker fabrics, you won't really have that many thin looking folds. So things you'll notice, bunching areas are not as present, folds are larger. So especially with like knit, your folds are not going to be very, very thin. You'll see a lot of these thin kind of like triangular folds in say like t-shirts, cotton, stuff like that. Chiffon, you won't see it with knit, you won't see it with heavy cotton or fleece, you won't see it with Sherpa. And that's because they're very, very big and thick, like I mentioned, and they won't fold the exact same way. So that's kind of one thing you want to keep in mind. Stiff fabrics. So stiff fabrics use a lot of triangles, sharp triangles. So this includes leather, polyester, corduroy, denim. So stiff fabrics, the number one that I usually use is a suit. See, I used heavy cotton up here. Cotton and polyester are very... Polyester is considered like the low quality fabric, but you'll see it a lot with cheaper suits. And the thing with polyester is because it is mostly plastic, so it's able to hold its shape a little bit better.
If you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education, become a member on Patreon.
Oh, here's a fun fact, by the way. I wasn't really going to go over this, but if you didn't know, men's clothing and women's clothing, when they're buttoned up, the buttons are on different sides depending on if it's for women or for men. So if you care about that stuff, there you go. All right, so this is a bit of a stick fabric. So notice some things. You'll notice that tension areas are not as present if the fabric is thicker, folds are sharper. If it's thinner, yes, they will be present because thinner fabric is very easily manipulated. But if it's thicker, then the fabric will not have as much tension areas. Think of a suit, right? Your suit, if the arm is pulled out, right? If the arm is by the side, because that fabric is very stiff, very heavy, you won't have a lot of those tension areas because you want the fabric to look sleek and to hold its pose, basically. You want it to look constantly very, very sleek. That's why you have to iron it. Because when you iron out polyester or cotton, it'll hold its shape because it is a bit of a stiffer fabric. Polyester especially, because polyester is made of plastic mostly, so you want it to hold that shape, right? So if it is a bit thicker, you will definitely not have as many tension areas. And the folds are sharper. Again, think of trying to, if you had a scarf, you're holding it between your two hands, you can kind of manipulate it. If you move your hands up and down, right, it can kind of flow. If you're kind of bunching it up, if you kind of crinkle it up, right, you'll notice that those folds are very, very loose and thin. Do the same thing to a sheet of paper. The thing with a sheet of paper is that it's a lot stiffer, so it doesn't flow the same way. It'll crinkle. That's the same thing with stiff fabrics. Stiff fabrics will behave closer to paper than they will to, say, like a cashmere, like, scarf. So you want to kind of think of that, and that's why the folds are very, very sharp in comparison. And then thin fabrics. This is going to be the last one. So you have a lot of thin, loose triangles and loops, so you're going to use both of them. So you have a lot of thin cotton, cashmere, silk, chiffon, lace, etc. So most of the shirts that you wear will be kind of thin, loose fabric, especially during the summer. A lot of your thin, loose fabrics are going to have a lot of loose triangles and loops because they're thinner. Again, think of that paper. If you are trying to bend that foam board versus trying to bend that thin piece of paper, that thin piece of paper bends a little bit easier. So that's what we're thinking about with our thin fabrics. But notice that all fold types are very present, especially if you're working with very, very thin fabric. Chiffon is one of them, or silk is another. If you have those very thin, kind of loose, flowy kinds of fabrics. So all those fold types are very, very present because the folds flow, the fabric flows. Think of it as like almost a slightly stiffer water when you're working with thinner fabrics because it'll flow, it bends, it moves very, very easily. Right, so that's kind of what you want to think about if your fabric is a little bit thinner. So final thoughts. Number one, folds aren't parallel. If you have a bent arm, you don't want your folds to look like that. No, sir. You don't want them to be perfectly aligned with each other because then that looks very, very unnatural. Number two, tightness affects folds. If it's tighter, it means there are less gathering areas overall. There may still be quite a few tension areas. There may still be quite a few bunching areas, but overall there will be less of all kinds of folds, but the tighter is, the less gathering areas will be, right? If you're wearing a morph suit, there are no gathering areas because they will be molded perfectly to your body, so there's nowhere for the fabric to gather. But if you bend your arm or if you get yanked by that suit, you know there's going to be some tension or some bunching. Number three, And don't forget external factors. So that includes wind or weather, if it's wet, or weight, sitting or leaning on things. Wind especially, that's one that I find that everybody forgets about. If there is a heavy breeze and that person's wearing a skirt, if there's wind and that skirt's not moving, that's wrong. Right? I'm just saying, right? It goes same for hair. If there's wind, that skirt better be moving, dude. It better be moving. But yeah, final thoughts. Folds aren't parallel. Tightness affects folds. The tighter it is means less gathering areas. And don't forget external factors. If your fabrics are wet, they are going to have a lot of tension areas because the fabric is going to be pulled down by the weight. Or it might be sticking to the body. So if you have like a white t-shirt or like there's a t-shirt in general, it's going to be sticking to the body. So you're going to have different kinds of tension areas that are going to be tougher to draw. Or if you're sitting or leaning on things, if you're sitting on a chair, your pants will look different or your dress will look different or the suit will look different, right? So if you have external factors, make sure you factor those in.
Tune into our weekly live streams for art tips and demos in real time. Subscribe and hit that little bell to get notifications for when we're live. Join a virtual class to learn live from our professional artists. Get creative assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork. Start today and level up your practice. If you learned something new, like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, here's a couple other videos you can check out next.